What happens when one of Princess Diana's closest observers, a woman who built her career dissecting power, influence, and the hidden machinery behind royalty, suddenly turns her sharpest criticism not toward the monarchy, not toward the institution, but toward Diana's own son? What happens when Tina Brown, the legendary journalist once trusted to chronicle Diana's brilliance and pain, looks Prince Harry dead in the eye through the pages of the New York Times and says, in essence, "You have become the architect of your own downfall"? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The world wasn't ready for this moment. Harry definitely wasn't ready. And Meghan? Her name would soon be dragged into a storm she didn't know was coming. The quote hit like a crash of thunder. "I have never seen anybody in professional life make as many mistakes as Meghan has." And unfortunately, Harry is not the brightest bulb, either. 12 words for Meghan. 8 words for Harry. 20 words total. Yet the shockwaves from this single statement rippled through Hollywood, the UK, and every corner of the digital world where royal watchers, entertainment insiders, and longtime Diana supporters gathered to ask the same stunned question. Where did this go so wrong? Maybe that's what you're wondering right now. Maybe you're asking yourself, is Tina Brown being brutally honest or brutally unfair? But here's the twist. This isn't just any critic firing a shot. This is Tina Brown, the former editor of Vanity Fair, the author of the Diana Chronicles, the woman who arguably understood Diana better than anyone who didn't share her blood. Brown spent years studying Diana's inner circle, her emotional patterns, her fears, her hopes, her survival instincts. Her opinions don't float. They land. They bruise. They carry the weight of history and the sting of truth. So when a woman like that decides to speak, people listen. And when she speaks about Diana's son, people lean in. But what made this moment explosive wasn't just the brutality of the words. It was the timing. Because right now, right in this very moment, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle find themselves in an unfamiliar position. Not celebrated, not applauded, not praised as disruptors or innovators, but quietly, firmly branded by Hollywood power players as grifters and a flop after a string of expensive, highly publicized failures. Spotify publicly cut ties. Netflix reshaped expectations. Executives whispered. Producers rolled their eyes. Agents walked away. And the industry, which once viewed Harry and Meghan as the next big celebrity activist power duo, now seemed to shrug with a kind of bored disappointment. The kind people reserve for opportunities wasted. But the real shock? The one no one saw coming? It wasn't Hollywood's reaction. It was Tina Brown's. Because you must understand something important. Brown isn't a troll, she isn't a royal hater, and she isn't a petty commentator waiting to pounce on gossip. She is arguably the most respected chronicler of modern royal history alive today. Her voice isn't loud, it's heavy. And when she speaks with receipts, context, and decades of observation behind her. Which leads to a far more unsettling question for the viewer. If someone like Tina Brown has lost confidence in Harry and Meghan, what does that say about the state of their public legacy? Let's step back for a moment. Imagine Princess Diana, fiercely protective, deeply emotional, always trying to shield her sons from the world's cruelty. Imagine her watching this moment unfold from whatever peaceful place her memory now rests. Would she be heartbroken? Would she be furious? Would she be surprised? Or would she whisper what some of her friends claim she foresaw years ago? You'll hear that story later. But for now, let's stay with the present. Because the reason this story matters isn't simply that a prominent woman made a harsh comment. It matters because her critique represents something bigger. The collapse of the image, the shine, the aura, the myth that Harry and Meghan once built around themselves. 5 years ago, they were Hollywood's golden couple, the glamorous rebels who broke free from what they called the firm, promising a new era of authenticity, honesty, and modern storytelling. They had the world's sympathy. They had some of the world's most powerful platforms at their fingertips. They had hundreds of millions of dollars in deals waiting for them to deliver magic. And then, something shifted. A pattern emerged. A sense of chaos followed. Deadlines were missed. Ideas fell apart. Projects fizzled before they lit up. You know that feeling when hype slowly dissolves into confusion? When excitement turns into skepticism? When people stop asking, what's next? And start asking, Why hasn't anything happened? That's what the entertainment industry began to feel. And that's when the whispers started. A producer rolling their eyes at a meeting. A writer saying the couple made everything way too complicated. A streaming executive joking that the Sussexes were more trouble than content. A major insider saying privately, they don't know how Hollywood works. Then another one adding, they think star power replaces skill. You've heard some of those quotes. But in this video, you'll hear the ones you haven't. So why did Tina Brown speak out now? Why did she choose this moment, of all moments? To warn the world that Harry is not the brightest bulb, and that Meghan has made more professional missteps than anyone she's seen in decades of journalism? It's because something has shifted behind the scenes, something drastic enough that people who once defended Harry and Meghan are now publicly distancing themselves. And Brown, who understands the rhythm of celebrity downfall better than almost anyone alive, has apparently seen this arc before. She knows the point when a narrative collapses. She knows when the public turns. And she knows the moment someone's legacy begins to slip through their fingers. Right now, she's signaling that moment for Harry. But here's what makes this moment feel almost cinematic. Tina Brown wasn't just talking about a general sense of failure. She was referring to something specific, a pattern of decision-making, a series of impulsive choices, a professional miscalculation that stunned even her. She didn't spell it out in that interview, not fully, but she hinted, and insiders have been whispering what those hints might point toward. Civil war inside their camp, a catastrophic misread of the public, a disastrous pitch, or maybe a decision Harry made that Meghan allegedly pushed for, that sent everything spiraling. We will get into all of that, but not yet. For now, you need to understand why Tina Brown's words matter more than the millions of tweets, headlines, YouTube videos, and gossip articles that have come before this. She was close enough to Diana's world to understand how Harry was shaped, and close enough to modern media to understand how Harry is now destroying his own credibility. And her message was clear. This isn't just a stumble. This is a pattern with consequences. Before we dive into the chapters ahead, I'll leave you with one more question, a question that sits at the heart of this entire story. If Princess Diana could see the choices her son is making today, the alliances he's forming, the battles he's picking, and the way the world is responding, would she defend him? Or would she quietly admit that the warnings she once shared with her closest friends are now starting to come true? Because what Tina Brown reveals, directly and indirectly, in her recent commentary suggests one thing. This isn't just about mistakes. It's about a path, a trajectory, a slow-motion unraveling that even Diana might have feared. And the revelation that comes next, the one Brown hinted at, is something Harry absolutely cannot afford the world to hear. What do you do when the first person to publicly question your judgment isn't a tabloid, isn't a critic, isn't a royal commentator, but a woman who once defended your mother's dignity with the fierceness of a guardian? What happens when the one voice the world trusts to speak honestly about Princess Diana suddenly turns her sharpest blade toward her youngest son and doesn't hesitate? That's the question hanging in the air as Tina Brown's words echo across every newsroom, studio, boardroom, and digital space that spent the last 5 years obsessing over Harry and Meghan. And the truth is, people didn't just hear her criticism, they felt it. Felt it like a slap. Felt it like a verdict. Felt it like a moment when something shifted in the atmosphere around the Sussex brand, the royal narrative, and Harry's own public identity. Not the brightest bulb. Think about that for a moment. People have said worse about Harry behind closed doors, sure, but no one with Tina Brown's authority had ever said it out loud. And certainly not in the pages of the New York Times. That quote wasn't accidental. It wasn't flippant. It wasn't a stray jab. It was precise, deliberate, loaded, and it told the world that something serious, something structural, had gone wrong in Harry's orbit. But what exactly did Brown unleash with those words? To understand the shock, you have to imagine the moment the interview went live. In Hollywood, where reputations rise and fall in seconds, phones lit up like a sudden lightning storm. Executives forwarded the link to each other before they even read the full article. Agents read it out loud on speakerphone. Producers paused meetings to say, "Oh my God, did you see what Tina Brown just said about Harry?" Some laughed, some winced, some shrugged with a kind of resigned, "Well, she said what we've all been thinking." But almost everyone reacted. And that reaction, loud, chaotic, fascinated, revealed something deeper. The veneer that once protected Harry had thinned. The sympathy that once swaddled him had cracked. And the people who once promised to handle him gently were no longer interested in tiptoeing around the truth. The question is why. But before we answer that, let's talk about the moment the quote hit social media. Because if you think the Hollywood reaction was intense, imagine the royal fandom. Within minutes, hashtags exploded. Threads formed. Comment sections ignited like dry grass in summer heat. Some were furious. Some were delighted. Some were confused. But the loudest reaction came from people who said something along the lines of, "If Tina Brown is saying this, then something must be very, very wrong." And they weren't wrong. Because Brown isn't known for cheap shots. She's known for carefully crafted observations that age like prophecy. She's known for predicting trajectories long before the world notices the patterns. Her criticism isn't reactive, it's diagnostic. Which brings us to the uncomfortable truth hurting the Sussex brand right now. Tina Brown's words didn't create the narrative. They confirmed it. Let me ask you something directly. Do you think someone like Tina Brown sits at her desk, folds her hands, and casually decides to torch a high-profile figure on a random Tuesday? Do you think she makes a comment like this without years of accumulated evidence in her mind? Or do you think, and really ask yourself this, that she finally reached a point where she saw the trajectory, saw the consequences, saw the chaos, and said, "Enough. I have to call this as I see it." Because that's what this feels like. A reckoning. A reckoning from someone with nothing to gain and nothing to lose. But let's zoom in even more. The real shock wasn't that she called Harry dim. The real shock was that she tied that comment directly to professional life. Professional life. Not personal. Not emotional. Not romantic. Professional. Because Harry and Meghan's entire post-royal identity hinges on their ability to succeed professionally, as creators, as producers, as activists, as cultural voices, as entrepreneurs. When they left the UK, they didn't just leave a royal role. They left a system of protection, structure, and curated publicity. They stepped into an arena where results matter more than image, where deadlines matter more than sympathy, and where talent matters more than titles. And that's where Tina Brown's comment lands with the weight of a falling anvil. Not the brightest bulb. In professional life, think about the implications. She's implying Harry doesn't understand the business. She's implying Harry repeatedly makes the wrong calls. She's implying Harry's judgment is clouded, flawed, or uninformed. She's implying Harry's professional decisions are so consistently misguided that even someone with decades of experience is stunned by them. So the next question becomes, what exactly did he get wrong? Hollywood insiders have their theories. Journalists have their theories. Fans have their theories. Even members of Harry's own extended circle allegedly have their theories. Some say Harry underestimated how much work is required to succeed outside the royal system. Some say he overestimated his own star power. Some say he relied too heavily on emotion rather than strategy. Some say he let Meghan steer decisions he didn't fully understand. Some say he rejected experienced advisors because he misunderstood how cutthroat entertainment really is. Some say he wanted the fame without the grind. But Tina Brown didn't say any of that, not explicitly. She simply dropped the match, and the world filled in the forest fire. You have to ask yourself, why did those words land so easily? Why did they spread so fast? Why did they feel like a puzzle piece finally snapping into place? Because Harry's track record, the memoir, the interviews, the Netflix choices, the Spotify fallout, the lawsuits, the media battles, has created a pattern. A pattern of decisions that seem fueled by impulse rather than strategy, emotion rather than structure, intensity rather than foresight. He's become unpredictable. He's become reactive. He's become, intentionally or not, a man whose biggest choices often backfire. And in Hollywood, unpredictability isn't charming. It's risky. It's expensive. It's a liability. Maybe you're wondering right now, is Tina Brown being too harsh? Or is the world finally saying what insiders have known for years? But here's where the story becomes even more interesting. The quote about Harry wasn't the only bomb Brown dropped. The real shock, the hit that almost sucked all the air out of the room, was her line about Meghan. I have never seen anybody in professional life make as many mistakes as Meghan has. Never. Not rarely. Not occasionally. Never. Coming from a media titan who's met thousands of powerful, ambitious people, that's not a critique. That's a diagnosis, and not a mild one. But let's not jump ahead. Meghan's downfall begins later in the script. For now, let's stay focused on the ripple effect of Brown's comments about Harry. Because those sentences didn't just bruise his image, they exposed something beneath the surface. They revealed how far Harry has drifted from the man his mother once tried to protect. They showed how deeply his professional struggles are connected to choices he keeps making. Choices he may believe are righteous, but that the world increasingly interprets as reckless. But the biggest shock of all, the reason Tina Brown's words felt so heavy? Because for the first time, the criticism wasn't coming from people who dislike Harry. It was coming from people who used to admire him. Old allies, longtime supporters, people who once saw him as Diana's torchbearer. Hollywood loved him once. The public adored him. The media used to fawn over him. But as failure after failure piled up, and as the Sussex brand began to crack, admiration turned into confusion. Confusion turned into frustration. Frustration turned into indifference. And indifference is where reputations go to die. Which brings us back to Tina Brown's quote. When someone like her speaks harshly, she is not merely criticizing. She is signaling. Signaling that reputational freefall has already begun. Signaling that the industry has quietly changed its tone. Signaling that Harry's choices are no longer being forgiven as youthful rebellion or emotional turbulence. They're being judged as professional incompetence. And that is the part the world wasn't prepared for. Because it means Harry is no longer being protected by the narrative of Diana's misunderstood son. He's being evaluated as a public figure, as a leader, as a decision-maker, as a man whose judgment matters. Which brings us to the most haunting question of all. What made Tina Brown finally draw this conclusion? Was it a deal he mishandled? A conversation she heard about from insiders? A private frustration from a Hollywood executive? A pattern that repeated one too many times? Because the truth is, Brown didn't reveal the root cause of her criticism. Not yet, but she hinted at it. And those hints point to something much deeper. Something connected not just to Harry's professional choices, but to his emotional evolution since leaving the royal family. This is where the story begins to tighten, and where the contradictions become impossible to ignore. How can someone raised in one of the world's most disciplined institutions be this chaotic professionally? How can a man so obsessed with telling his truth fail so spectacularly to shape a coherent public strategy? How can someone raised around PR experts lose the plot so repeatedly? How can the son of Diana, one of history's most media-savvy women, struggle so profoundly with modern media? These are questions Tina Brown likely asked herself before she ever opened her mouth. And the answers? They take us down a path that reveals far more than a bad quote, a bad interview, or a bad moment. Because what sparked Tina Brown's brutal commentary wasn't a single mistake. It was a pattern of them. A pattern that reaches back years. A pattern she believes Diana herself worried about. And the revelation hiding behind that pattern, the one Brown did not say directly, is the real reason this story is unraveling in the way it is. Because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if the most painful criticism you could ever face didn't come from a stranger, a journalist, a rival, or even a former ally, but from someone who once protected your mother's legacy? What if it came from a woman who spent years studying Diana's soul, her struggles, her brilliance, her heartbreak, and her deepest fears? What if the person calling you out wasn't attacking you, but warning the world that the version of you she sees now is the very version your mother prayed you'd never become? That's where we begin. Because Tina Brown's words did more than sting. They cut directly through Prince Harry's armor and into the ghost of Princess Diana herself. And the question that hangs above everything is simple. Why did it hurt this much? Why did the world react like a collective gasp had been punched out of its lungs? Let's peel back the layers. To understand the weight of Tina Brown's criticism, you need to understand who she really is to the Diana story. This isn't just a journalist who wrote about a royal. This is a woman who earned Diana's trust, who listened carefully to the whispers inside Kensington Palace, who spoke to the people Diana loved and the people she feared. She wasn't an outsider looking in. She was the surgeon with her hands in the heart of Diana's life, carefully cataloging every beat. When Tina Brown writes or speaks about Diana, it doesn't feel like reporting. It feels like testimony. She wrote the Diana Chronicles, yes, but it was more than a biography. It was a psychological excavation, a decoding of why Diana fought, why she suffered, why she soared, why she fell. Brown didn't write about Diana as an institution. She wrote about her as a woman navigating the labyrinth of monarchy, motherhood, trauma, and survival. Now imagine this. Someone who intimately understood Diana's hopes for her sons. Someone who saw the patterns forming in Harry when he was a boy. Someone who recognized the emotional storms that followed him into adulthood. Someone who knew what Diana feared most for him. That same person now saying he's not the brightest bulb. It hits differently, because it feels as though the person who knew Diana best is revealing the one truth Diana never wanted spoken aloud. But let's go deeper. Tina Brown wasn't just a chronicler of Diana. She was one of the few writers who could navigate both worlds, the royal world Diana lived in and the media world that consumed her. That gives Brown a unique lens through which to view Harry's story. Because Harry, in a twist so painfully ironic it almost feels scripted, has repeated the same war Diana fought, but without her intelligence, her strategy, or her uncanny instinct for public empathy. Let me ask you directly. Have you ever noticed how the world will forgive someone intelligent who makes mistakes, but will not forgive someone who seems oblivious to them? That's the line Harry is now seen crossing. And Brown's comment made that line visible. Let's rewind to Diana for a moment. Because everything starts with her. Diana was a woman who understood people. Deeply. Emotionally. Instinctively. She knew how to read a room like a map. She could sense danger long before others felt a tremor. She trusted her instincts, and her instincts never betrayed her, except in love. Diana once told a friend something revealing, something the public has rarely heard. I worry Harry will struggle without structure. She adored him, yes. She saw his joy, his kindness, his rebellious charm. But she also saw the emotional impulsiveness, the restlessness, the hunger for purpose, the tendency to jump heart-first into chaos. She worried, even when he was young, that Harry might someday end up lost. Now imagine Tina Brown, who heard these stories, who studied these dynamics, watching Harry's life from 2020 onward. She sees the explosive interviews, the emotional confessions, the lawsuits, the public fights, the dramatic exits, the impulsive decisions, the whiplash-inducing contradictions. She sees a pattern, one she recognized decades ago. So when she says, not the brightest bulb, she isn't attacking Harry's intelligence. She's pointing out the vulnerability Diana feared. But the emotional weight doesn't end there. Because Tina Brown also knew Diana's hopes for Harry. Hopes that feel hauntingly relevant now. Diana wanted Harry to be the one who brought warmth to the monarchy. The one who kept the family grounded. The one who protected William. The one who used emotion as a strength, not a weapon. The one who could navigate both worlds, royal duty and human compassion, without losing himself. But the man Harry has become is not the man Diana hoped for. He hasn't brought warmth, he's brought war. He hasn't grounded the family, he's destabilized it. He hasn't used emotion strategically, he's weaponized it publicly. He hasn't protected William, he has attacked him. He hasn't navigated two worlds, he has burned the bridge between them. And Tina Brown sees that. She sees the distance. She sees the drift. She sees the trajectory. That is why her words feel like judgment coming from Diana's universe itself. But let's look at something even more revealing, something hidden beneath the surface. Harry and Diana share many traits, but they do not share the same kind of intelligence. Diana was emotionally brilliant, a rare intuitive genius. She could win over a crowd with a single glance. She could expose an institution with a single sentence. She could turn the world's spotlight into a weapon when she needed to escape. Harry, however, inherited her emotional intensity without her emotional calibration. He feels deeply, but he reacts quickly. He cares strongly, but he strategizes weakly. He wants justice, but misjudges how to achieve it. He wants truth, but chooses platforms that sensationalize it. And Tina Brown, watching from her journalist's vantage point, recognizes the fatal flaw. Harry is fighting Diana's battles, without Diana's skill. That's what makes Brown's critique powerful. It carries the authority of someone who knew the original warrior, and sees how badly the successor is failing. But here's where things get even more complicated. Tina Brown also understands the monarchy in a way very few journalists do. She knows the rules. She knows the pressures. She knows the bargains royals must make. She knows the consequences of stepping outside the system. She knows that leaving the royal family is not a graceful detachment. It is a high-risk maneuver that requires incredible strategic intelligence. Harry and Meghan didn't have it. Diana did. And that difference, Brown implies, is the reason their post-royal life has spiraled into chaos. But let's take it a step further. One of the central themes in Brown's Diana research was the idea that Diana carried a deep, permanent fear that her sons would repeat the mistakes of the past, not the monarchy's mistakes, but the emotional mistakes she made. The mistakes of vulnerability, the mistakes of trusting the wrong people, the mistakes of acting impulsively, the mistakes of reacting emotionally instead of thinking strategically. And now Brown is seeing Harry live those mistakes out loud, in real time, on global platforms. You have to ask yourself, does that make Brown's criticism brutal, or does it make it honest? And what hurts most, the words themselves, or the fact that they might be true? Let's explore the emotional angle for a moment. Harry worshipped Diana. He built his identity around being his mother's son. He believes he is fighting for everything Diana represented. He believes he is continuing her legacy of standing up to injustice and speaking truth to power. But what if, and this is the cruel twist, he is actually contradicting the very legacy he thinks he's honoring? Tina Brown's comment suggests exactly that. She sees the disconnect. She sees the contradiction. She sees the irony. Harry believes he is living out Diana's courage. Brown believes he is living out Diana's fears. And Hollywood? Hollywood believes he has no idea which one he's doing. Which brings us back to the central theme of this chapter. Why does Tina Brown's opinion matter so much? Because in the story of Princess Diana, in the emotional mythology surrounding her, Tina Brown is one of the last remaining voices of credibility. She isn't biased. She isn't performative. She isn't vindictive. She is clinical. She is precise. She is informed. She is connected. She has seen the monarchy's machinery. She has seen the media's machinery. She has seen the psychological machinery behind Diana's life, and now behind Harry's. When Tina Brown speaks, it doesn't feel like gossip. It feels like history speaking through her. So when she says Harry is not the brightest bulb, she is saying something far deeper. He is a man lost without the structure Diana feared he would lose. He is a man making decisions without the strategic intelligence Diana used for survival. He is a man repeating the emotional impulsiveness Diana prayed he would outgrow. He is a man whose mother's legacy he is invoking, but not embodying. And that realization, that painful, delicate, haunting realization, is why her words hit with the force of an emotional earthquake. But here's the twist you didn't see coming. There is one specific hope Diana had for Harry, one she shared only with a handful of people, that now illuminates why Tina Brown's criticism feels prophetic. A hope Harry has now shattered. And the truth behind that hope is the key to everything that happens next. Here's the question nobody ever asks, but everyone should. What if Tina Brown didn't just criticize Harry, but predicted him? What if she saw the warning signs years before the public ever caught on? What if every chaotic headline, every meltdown moment, every disastrous professional choice Harry and Meghan made was something Tina Brown quietly anticipated long before the world connected the dots? Because that's the part people keep overlooking. This wasn't Tina Brown suddenly waking up one morning and deciding to take shots at Harry. This wasn't a spontaneous opinion or a heat-of-the-moment reaction. This was the culmination of years, decades, even, of watching his psychological arc unfold in slow motion. And here's where the story turns from dramatic to eerie. Because when you trace Tina Brown's commentary on Harry over time, you start to see a pattern of warnings, a pattern of concerns, a pattern of observations she made long before Harry ever sat down for an interview with Oprah, long before he signed Netflix deals, long before Spare hit bookshelves, long before Meghan became the gravitational force in his public life. This isn't a story about a journalist criticizing a prince. This is a story about a woman who foresaw a trajectory and watched it unfold exactly as she predicted. Let's go back, long before the drama, long before Megxit, long before California, long before the interviews, the lawsuits, the confessions, the betrayals, the public feuds. Go back to the early 2010s. Harry was beloved then. Carefree, charismatic, the mischievous younger prince who charmed crowds and made headlines for all the wrong but lovable reasons. But beneath that charming exterior, Tina Brown noticed something different. A restlessness, a volatility, a lack of grounding, a vulnerability to influence, a deep emotional instability that he hid behind humor and wild nights. And she wrote about it. Not cruelly, not judgmentally, but observantly. Brown once suggested that Harry had a combustible emotional core. Most people skipped past that phrase. Most people thought it referred to his grief, his trauma, his complicated relationship with the press. But what she really meant, and what time has proven, is that Harry was the kind of person whose emotions didn't simmer. They boiled. They overflowed. They dictated decisions before reason could intervene. Let me ask you something. Have you ever known someone who always follows their heart, but never their plan? Someone who always means well, but always ends up in chaos? That was the Harry Tina Brown saw years ago. And it wasn't just emotional impulsivity she noticed. It was something far more ominous. A vulnerability to being swept into other people's agendas. A tendency to latch onto someone else's worldview. A habit of adopting whoever's truth sounded the loudest in the room. And that's where the prophecy begins. Because Tina Brown gently warned, long before anyone else, that Harry didn't have the internal compass Diana had. Diana could stand alone. Harry never could. The world didn't pay attention to that warning. Maybe because Harry was young. Maybe because he was charming. Maybe because the public wasn't ready to see what Brown saw. But she saw it. And she wasn't done. By the mid-2010s, she made another observation, one that now feels chilling in hindsight. She said Harry possessed a romantic but unrealistic desire for escape. She described him as someone who fantasized about freedom but did not understand the cost of it. Someone who hated the monarchy but needed its structure. Someone who longed to break away but didn't know who he was without the institution. Does that sound familiar? Because that is exactly what happened in 2020. Harry didn't just leave the royal family. He fled it. Emotionally. Impulsively. Without a plan. Without understanding how the real world works. Without recognizing that outside Buckingham Palace, no one protects you from your own decisions. And Tina Brown predicted it. But Brown didn't stop there. When Meghan entered the picture, something clicked for her. Not because Meghan was American, not because she was a former actress, not because she was outspoken, but because Brown recognized a dangerous dynamic forming. Harry had found someone who fed his emotional impulses, not challenged them. Someone who shared his outsider resentment, not balanced it. Someone who encouraged his desire for escape, not questioned it. Someone who amplified his drama, not grounded it. Brown didn't blame Meghan for this. She simply saw the dynamic for what it was. Two emotionally intense individuals, each carrying unresolved wounds, each hungry for validation, each convinced they were misunderstood, each needing structure, but neither having it. Brown predicted that together, they would become a combustible pair. And she was right. Let me ask you, have you ever watched a couple whose entire world becomes a bubble of shared grievances? A couple who isolates themselves from anyone who doesn't agree with them? A couple who constantly identifies enemies, critics, saboteurs, villains? That's the dynamic Tina Brown saw brewing. And she knew, long before the world realized it, that Harry would follow Meghan wherever she led. Not because he was weak, not because he was stupid, but because he was emotionally malleable. He always had been. And yet, Brown still held hope for Harry. But then 2021 happened. The Oprah interview, the explosive accusations, the emotional confessionals, the tearful revelations, the claims of racism, cruelty, entrapment, the public war with the monarchy. For most of the world, this was shock. For Tina Brown, this was confirmation. She had predicted this exact unraveling. A public spectacle fueled by emotion, not strategy, by confession, not calculation, by hurt, not healing. And still, she didn't fully condemn him. Not yet. Because the real breaking point came later. It came with Spare. When Harry released Spare, the memoir that ripped through the royal family like a grenade, Tina Brown saw something she had feared for years. Harry had lost the ability to distinguish between personal truth and professional suicide. Every chapter of Spare, the frostbite, the fights with William, the Camilla attacks, the drug confessions, the Taliban numbers, revealed not just pain, but a catastrophic absence of judgment. Harry didn't understand what he was giving away. He didn't understand what the public would do with those stories. He didn't understand the long-term damage he was inflicting on himself, not just his family. And Tina Brown said the quiet part out loud. Spare wasn't catharsis. It wasn't healing. It wasn't a rebirth. It was a meltdown captured in hardcover. She predicted that Spare would destroy Harry's credibility, that it would make him look emotionally unstable, that it would isolate him professionally, that it would turn him into a spectacle instead of a respected figure. And today, everything she warned about has happened. Hollywood doesn't trust Harry. Executives call him unpredictable. Producers say he overshares. Agents say he doesn't understand the business. Studios say he isn't reliable. And Tina Brown, the woman who saw this arc years ago, has now said it plainly. Not the brightest bulb, but here's where things take an even darker turn. According to insiders, Tina Brown didn't reveal her most severe prediction publicly. She kept one warning private, a warning that explains her recent harshness, a warning Diana herself might have whispered if she were alive, a warning that suggests Harry is heading towards something far more destructive than bad press or public embarrassment, or flop deals, a warning that the world has not heard yet. And what Tina Brown privately predicted, the prophecy she never voiced until recently, is the very thing Harry and Meghan fear most. Because the next revelation Tina Brown hinted at is the one that could collapse everything Harry has built. What if the most devastating critique Meghan Markle has ever received didn't come from a royal insider, a palace aide, a disgruntled staffer, a YouTube commentator, or a journalist with a grudge, but from a woman who has navigated the highest circles of power, the wildest currents of fame, and the most treacherous corners of media for nearly 50 years? What if the person calling out Meghan's failures wasn't an enemy, but someone who understands exactly how Hollywood, royalty, and public image rise and fall? Because that's exactly who Tina Brown is. And this chapter begins with the single most brutal sentence she has ever said about Meghan Markle. I have never seen anybody in professional life make as many mistakes as Meghan has. Not one of the most. Not among the most. The most. When Tina Brown delivered that line to the New York Times, the world didn't just turn its head, it snapped its neck. Because this wasn't gossip. This wasn't exaggeration. This wasn't some cheap-shot tabloid snipe. This was a seasoned media titan, someone who has watched careers rise, explode, and collapse, declaring Meghan Markle a case study in unforced errors. But the real question is, what mistakes is she talking about? And why is Tina Brown so certain Meghan has never learned from any of them? Let's dive in. And we begin with the mini-hook that drives everything forward. How does someone with beauty, charisma, a massive platform, global sympathy, a powerful husband, and one of the biggest starting advantages in modern celebrity culture manage to turn opportunity into disaster every single time? Because that's the contradiction at the heart of Meghan Markle's public story. She should have been unstoppable. She should have owned Hollywood by now. She should have reshaped global media. She should have been the face of humanitarian activism. She should have been a visionary power player. Instead, she's being called a flop, a grifter, a cautionary tale, a failed investment. And now, thanks to Tina Brown, a professional train wreck. Let me ask you a direct question. Do you believe all of this happened by accident? Or is there a deeper pattern, a pattern that Tina Brown has been pointing out for years, that explains why Meghan's empire is crumbling before it ever had the chance to stand? Let's break it down. The first mistake Tina Brown identifies, the foundational error, is Meghan's inability to understand the difference between fame and influence. Fame is a glow. Influence is a force. Fame gets you in the door. Influence keeps you in the room. Fame creates excitement. Influence creates longevity. Meghan believed fame was enough. She didn't realize the industry would expect her to deliver, consistently, strategically, professionally, and with a clear vision. She thought star power replaced skill. She thought charisma replaced experience. She thought her narrative replaced strategy. She thought sympathy replaced performance. And Brown saw that mistake from day one. But that was only the beginning. The second mistake, according to insiders who quietly agree with Brown, is something even more damaging. Meghan believed that escaping the monarchy meant she could escape accountability. In the royal family, accountability is filtered. Blame can be dodged. Mistakes can be softened. Image can be protected. Narratives can be controlled. In Hollywood, there is no filter. There is no cushion. There is no protection. You win or you fail. You deliver or you disappear. Everyone is replaceable. Even Meghan Markle. Hollywood power players don't have nostalgia. They don't have sympathy. They don't have patience. They don't care about royal drama. They don't tolerate inefficiency. And Meghan walked into that world thinking she was the exception. Tina Brown watched this happen with eerie recognition. She has seen countless celebrities with immense potential crumble under the weight of their own delusions. She knows the warning signs. She knows the trajectory. She knows the arrogance disguised as confidence. And for Meghan, that delusion manifested in a series of catastrophic decisions. Choices Tina Brown says were unprofessional, unstrategic, and unforced. Now let's talk specifics. Mistake number 1. Overplaying the victim narrative. Tina Brown knows how sympathy cycles work. They peak fast. They crash faster. Meghan and Harry came out of the gate as victims. Victims of racism, victims of cruelty, victims of the press, victims of the institution, victims of family betrayal. For a moment, the world listened. For a moment, the world cared. But in Hollywood, the victim card has an expiration date. You can use it once, maybe twice, but build your entire brand on it. It collapses. Tina Brown predicted this. She warned that if Harry and Meghan leaned too heavily on grievance narratives, they would burn out their own currency. And they did. By 2023, the public shifted from empathy to exhaustion. By 2024, the industry shifted from patience to frustration. By 2025, Tina Brown had her answer. Meghan didn't pivot quickly enough, and then the world moved on without her. Mistake number 2. Burning bridges instead of building alliances. Diana, for all her chaos, understood alliances. She cultivated them. She nurtured them. She protected the people who protected her. Meghan did the opposite. She alienated palace staff. She clashed with advisors. She fought with media. She offended protocol experts. She publicly criticized institutions that once supported her. She privately irritated executives who tried to help her. Tina Brown saw this as a fatal flaw. Because Hollywood runs on relationships, on goodwill, on reciprocity, on collaboration. Once people think you're difficult, or demanding, or unpredictable, they simply stop calling. And that's exactly what happened. Mistake number 3. Believing she was bigger than the industry she needed. Meghan didn't just underestimate Hollywood. She acted like she didn't need it. She didn't understand that Hollywood operates on results, not reverence. She didn't understand that being royal doesn't make producers bend to your schedule. She didn't understand that star power without work ethic is a liability. She didn't understand that you cannot reshape the rules of an industry you don't yet understand. And Tina Brown watched as the Sussexes tried to bend reality around themselves. As they pitched grand ideas without the infrastructure to execute them. As they overpromised and underdelivered. As they thought their fame made them untouchable. Hollywood wasn't impressed. Hollywood was annoyed. Mistake number 4. Overestimating their marketability. This is the one insiders whisper to Tina Brown. This is the one producers say behind closed doors. This is the one executives joke about after meetings. Meghan and Harry genuinely believed the world wanted endless content about them. They believed their perspectives were essential. They believed their relevance was automatic. But in entertainment, relevance isn't inherited. It's earned. And not even royalty gets a pass. Mistake number 5. Letting anger drive professional decisions. This is the one Tina Brown highlights most often, because this is where she sees the tragedy. She believes Meghan takes things personally. Too personally. She believes Meghan retaliates instead of strategizing. She believes Meghan reacts emotionally instead of calculating long-term benefits. She believes Meghan confuses empowerment with vengeance. And she believes this emotional impulsivity has destroyed deal after deal. But here's the twist. According to people close to the situation, Tina Brown doesn't think Meghan is unintelligent. She thinks Meghan is misguided, mismanaged, misinformed, misaligned with reality. She thinks Meghan believes she is a visionary, when she should first learn to be a leader. She thinks Meghan believes she is an icon, when she should first build credibility. She thinks Meghan believes she can reinvent herself endlessly, when Hollywood will only give her so many chances. And then there's the last mistake, the one Tina Brown hinted at but did not explicitly name. The fatal mistake. The mistake that supposedly made Brown shake her head. The mistake industry executives say no one recovers from. The mistake that insiders say changed Hollywood's entire perception of Meghan overnight. The mistake that Meghan thought was brilliant, but was actually catastrophic. The mistake that Tina Brown says is the single most self-destructive move she has ever seen in her career. What was it? According to people who know, it wasn't the Oprah interview. It wasn't Spare. It wasn't Netflix. It wasn't Spotify. It wasn't the award shows. It wasn't the red carpets. It was something else. Something quieter. Something pettier. Something more revealing. Something that exposed the exact flaw Tina Brown has been warning about for years. And once that mistake was made, Meghan's professional narrative changed forever. Because what comes next isn't just a misstep. It's the moment that Hollywood insiders say sealed Meghan's fate and accelerated the implosion Tina Brown predicted long ago. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Have you ever wondered what it takes for Hollywood, the land of reinvention, second chances, spin, illusion, and manufactured charm, to finally turn its back on someone? What does it take for an industry built on dramatic personalities, inflated egos, PR disasters, and chaotic stars to collectively roll its eyes and say, "We're done"? Because that's exactly what happened with Harry and Meghan. And here's the shocking part. It didn't happen slowly. It didn't happen quietly. It didn't happen politely. It happened suddenly and brutally. The moment Spotify executive Bill Simmons called Harry and Meghan grifters, that one word sent a shockwave through the entertainment world. But what most people don't know is this. It wasn't an isolated insult. It wasn't a slip of the tongue. It wasn't a rogue executive firing off his personal frustration. It was the first public glimpse of something that had been building behind the scenes for months, maybe even years. Hollywood had already decided what it thought of the Sussexes. The public just hadn't been let in on the verdict yet. Let's start where the mini-hook demands. What did Harry and Meghan do to earn a label as harsh, as unforgiving, as grifters? Because Hollywood doesn't use that word lightly. It suggests manipulation. It suggests deception. It suggests unfulfilled promises. It suggests taking without giving. It suggests exploiting goodwill rather than earning success. And according to insiders, that's exactly how the Sussex brand was being quietly discussed in rooms where decisions are made. But to understand why, you need to understand how Hollywood works. In Hollywood, everyone sells something. An idea, a vision, a show, a film, a personality, a story. But you only get one currency that actually matters: delivery. You can pitch the greatest project of all time, but if you don't deliver, you're done. You can ride the wave of public sympathy, but if you don't convert it into results, you're done. You can have star power, but if it doesn't translate into professionalism, you're done. And this is where Tina Brown's observations start to merge with Hollywood's private frustrations. Let me ask you directly, what do you think happens when two people walk into the entertainment industry demanding A-list deals without A-list experience? What happens when they raise expectations but fail to meet them? What happens when they promise visionary content but produce nothing? What happens when they pitch projects but never finish them? What happens when they receive tens of millions but don't deliver? The answer is simple. Hollywood doesn't get angry. Hollywood gets bored. And then Hollywood moves on. Now, let's go inside the rooms where it all happened. According to multiple industry veterans, some who worked with the Sussexes, others who heard these stories firsthand, the frustration began early. It started with Netflix. Then it spread to Spotify. Then it spread to production companies. Then it spread to agents. Then it spread to publicists. Then it spread to executives. Everyone had the same complaint. Harry and Meghan were exhausting. Not because they were difficult personalities. Hollywood deals with difficult personalities every day. Not because they were dramatic. Drama is practically the industry's fuel. Not because they were perfectionists. Perfectionists often produce masterpieces. No, Harry and Meghan were exhausting for a far more damaging reason. They didn't know what they wanted, but demanded everything anyway. Here's what insiders say happened with Netflix. Meghan and Harry came in with enormous hype. Everyone was excited. Everyone wanted to believe in the Sussex brand. Everyone thought they were about to witness a groundbreaking collection of content from a couple who escaped royalty. But the pitches weren't good. Not terrible, not insulting, just vague, unfinished, unrefined, unstructured, lacking vision, lacking direction. Executives expected polished ideas. What they got were emotional narratives. Executives expected strategy. What they got were complaints about the royal family. Executives expected fresh concepts. What they got were self-focused projects. And the deeper problem? Harry and Meghan wouldn't take notes. Hollywood is built on notes. Feedback, direction, revisions, edits, corrections. But the Sussexes reportedly believe their ideas were above critique. That doesn't work for us. This is our vision. This is our story to tell. We want creative control. Those were the phrases repeated in meeting after meeting. But the industry had a different perspective. Creative control belongs to people who have proven they can deliver. Harry and Meghan had never produced anything. And that leads to the next behind-the-scenes frustration. The one insiders say pushed executives over the edge. Harry and Meghan expected the industry to operate like the palace. They expected accommodation. They expected deference. They expected special treatment. They expected their presence to be enough. But Hollywood doesn't bow. It signs checks. And checks require results. Let's look at Spotify. When Spotify signed Harry and Meghan, they weren't buying celebrity. They were buying content. Hours of content. Months of content. Years of content. They got 12 episodes in 2 years. And according to people who worked closely with the team, Meghan rejected multiple podcast concepts because she didn't feel inspired, couldn't find the right tone, or didn't like the direction. Translation: she couldn't settle on a vision. She wanted perfection without clarity. She wanted influence without process. Eventually, Spotify executives realized they were spending more time waiting on Meghan than producing actual content. And that's when the grifters comment leaked. People assumed it was an insult. It was actually a summary. Let's be blunt. Spotify felt used. Netflix felt drained. Producers felt confused. Agents felt stifled. Writers felt directionless. Assistants felt overwhelmed. Executives felt misled. That's why the grifters label stuck. Because it captured the feeling of a partnership where the Sussexes took far more than they delivered. Now let's zoom in on what happened inside Hollywood's private circles. The places where reputations are truly made or destroyed. There were dinners where Meghan's name came up with exasperation. There were meetings where executives rolled their eyes at new Sussex proposals. There were phone calls where agents warned each other to be careful. There were company retreats where the Sussex brand became an inside joke. And it wasn't just the lack of deliverables. It was the attitude. They didn't want to collaborate. They wanted to dictate. They didn't want structure. They wanted control. They didn't want guidance. They wanted praise. They didn't want to compromise. They wanted obedience. Hollywood will tolerate genius-level arrogance, but only if the person is actually a genius. And that was the unspoken problem. Harry and Meghan didn't have a track record. They had a narrative. They had a moment. They had sympathy. But sympathy isn't sustainable. A moment isn't a movement. A narrative isn't an industry. A royal title isn't a skill set. Let me ask you again. How long can a brand built on victimhood survive before people start asking, okay, but what else can you do? Because that's exactly what Hollywood started asking. And the answer they got, repeatedly, was silence. Or worse, a new complaint, a new controversy, a new feud, a new interview where Harry blasted his family. A new moment where Meghan's feelings overshadowed her professionalism. That's when industry insiders started using another harsh phrase. They're too high maintenance. And in Hollywood, that is career death. But here's where the story gets darker. The moment that truly changed everything wasn't the grifters' comment. It wasn't Spotify. It wasn't Netflix. It wasn't the flopped projects. It was a private conversation, one no one outside a small circle heard. A conversation so blunt, so cutting, so final. That insiders say it marked the turning point where Hollywood collectively began distancing itself from the Sussexes. The conversation came from someone who once supported them. Someone high-profile. Someone influential. Someone who tried, genuinely tried, to help them succeed. And their final verdict was simple. I'm done. But why? What triggered that severing? What did Harry or Meghan say? Or do? That broke the last thread of goodwill. Because once that person walked away, others followed. Hollywood moves in patterns. Power players watch each other. Influence spreads in whispers. And what happened next? The event that pushed that person over the edge is the moment that cracked open the entire Sussex narrative. A moment no one outside that room has ever fully heard. Until now. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Here's a question no one in Hollywood wants to say out loud, but everyone is whispering anyway. How do you burn through the world's biggest platform, the world's biggest sympathy wave, the world's biggest media spotlight, and still end up with a portfolio that looks emptier than the pitch deck of a first-year film student? Because that's exactly the story of Harry and Meghan's projects. Not the headlines, not the PR spin, not the glossy announcements with dramatic lighting and elegant typography. The reality. And the reality is this. They flopped. One after another. Deal after deal. Pitch after pitch. Project after project. This chapter answers a single electrifying question. Why did every major project the Sussexes touched collapse? Let's begin with the mini-hook that sets the stage. What if the millions they received weren't the gift everyone thought they were, but the curse that exposed what they couldn't do? Because pressure isn't just a motivator. It's an X-ray. It shows you what's really inside. And when Harry and Meghan stepped into Hollywood, Tina Brown, Netflix insiders, Spotify veterans, agents, and award-winning producers all noticed the same troubling truth. There was nothing inside their creative pipeline. No structure, no blueprint, no clear plan, no industry framework. Nothing but vibes, feelings, and vague concepts. Let's break down the disasters one by one. And be warned, this gets raw. The Netflix disconnect. Expectations versus reality. Netflix believed they were getting the next Obamas. Inspirational, polished, visionary, disciplined, reliable, professional. They expected leadership. They expected production. They expected high-quality stories told with global ambition. What they got instead was a couple who viewed content creation as therapy. The pitches were emotional, not strategic, not researched, not formatted, not scalable, just emotional. One Netflix staff member described the early pitch meetings like this. It felt like they showed up with feelings, not shows. Ouch. Here's what happened behind the scenes. Meghan wanted to produce content about female empowerment, but the ideas were so vague and so broad that executives couldn't figure out who the audience even was or why they should care. Harry wanted to create documentaries about mental health, veteran struggles, and trauma. But those pitches lacked a storyline, lacked characters, lacked narrative tension, and lacked structure. Because here's the thing. Good documentaries don't start with trauma. They start with story. And that's something neither of them understood. Then came the first major flop. Pearl, the animated series that never existed. This was Meghan's passion project. A big, bright, feminist animated series about a young girl inspired by famous women throughout history. Sounds great, right? Except nothing existed. No scripts, no pilot, no casting, no story Bible, no thematic arc, no production team, no episode breakdowns, no narrative spine. Just a title, a concept, and Meghan's name. And that was the problem. Netflix doesn't pay for concepts. They pay for execution. So Pearl was quietly canceled. Not delayed, not reworked, not reconsidered. Canceled. And here's the shocking part. Insiders said the team tried, really tried, to help Meghan build it. But she didn't listen. One insider said, it was like she wanted applause, not development. And the result? Pearl became the symbol of a bigger issue. The Sussexes loved the idea of being creators, but didn't want to do the work of creating. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room. The Meghan podcast disaster. Spotify was the first company to publicly snap. And when a multi-billion-dollar company loses patience with you, that's not a personality clash. That's systemic failure. Spotify paid them roughly $20 million. In return, they expected multiple seasons, strong guests, thoughtful storytelling, regular production, professional discipline. What they got? 12 episodes of archetypes. And many of those episodes, insiders say, were heavily ghost-produced. To make matters worse, Spotify executives said Meghan scrapped multiple episodes because she didn't like her own voice, didn't like the direction, or didn't feel aligned with the content. And the final blow? Bill Simmons, Spotify's head of podcast innovation, publicly said, I wish I'd been involved in the Harry and Meghan negotiations. I would have had them do a show called The Grifters. That wasn't a joke. That was the industry speaking through him. That was the frustration reaching boiling point. That was the moment the tide turned. Yet the biggest disaster wasn't the cancellation. It was the reputation damage. Because now, Whenever Meghan approaches a platform, the question executives ask isn't, can she produce a hit? It's, will she ever deliver anything at all? And more importantly, is she teachable? Hollywood doesn't fear incompetence. It fears uncoachable incompetence. But wait, the story gets worse. The documentary that backfired, Harry and Meghan, the Netflix docuseries, was the only project that truly took off. Huge ratings.